What we must remember is that the special economic zone is underpinned and driven by economics. It's about economic development. So they play a very critical role within this process. If we can go to the next slide. The team I've introduced you, there was a third member of the team that was nominated. Unfortunately, she did not participate in the process and she recused herself. I think at this stage, I'd like to say that I have a day job other than this, and so does Melanie. And I think what we're going to do is just give you a very brief view of who we are, what we actually do, so that you understand the separation between our role within OC and our role that we do in our daily lives. So Melanie, I'm going to ask you to
I'm Melanie Andrews. I've been involved in the communities. I've been here since I was born here. I wasn't born here. Since 1978, so I've been here for more than 40 years. Although I only started doing community involvement in 2010 with the business that we wanted to put in Atlantis, I've been involved with the CRTP and eventually I found my love in early childhood development, where I'm the chairperson, was first chairperson of just a forum, and now I'm the chairperson of about 80 ECD centers in Atlantis. I do a lot of volunteer work with NPO registration, and I assist people with the bookkeeping. So my heart is with the community. And this is
Thank you, Melanie. I think she's just very humble, so it's very difficult to talk about herself. I think most people find it difficult to talk about themselves. I'll give you a brief summary of who I am. I worked in the corporate space for a long time as well as public sector. My technology, my core competence is technology, as a matter of fact, innovation. But a lot of that competence was developed through my engagement in business and consulting. I left corporate, got tired of it, started my own agency about 7-8 years ago. And I regard myself as a social entrepreneur, a disruptor. I like to disrupt things. I take risks. But more importantly, I wake up in the morning with a sense of purpose. Purpose is the thing that drives me. That's who I am. That's what defines me. And that's why I stood and volunteered. Because my reason for being here is answering the why question. And that is why I get up in the morning. And it was very simple, actually, when I figured it out. It's to make a difference. It's as simple as that. So in a nutshell, that's who I am. Then, so I'm not going to go through Professor Brian's CV. You can see it. Certainly he has the credibility and the experience. But at the same time, I think what's important with his role, and even mine, was that they helped us navigate through this very complex process. And we must applaud them for their strategic facilitation of this very complex process. So, what we tried to do was bring an element of science and method to the way we approach it. You know, when we were nominated, in my head, I thought I'd have a clipboard, a piece of paper, and tick things off. As we started going through this process, we realized we need to build a really sophisticated verification system that can stand scrutiny. So there was a lot of hard work that we need to do. The methodology is very simple. There was, if you just push it again, and again, and again. So there are really three components to the methodology. There's the entry contracting point. And at that point, we agree the scope with IC and GreenCape, what the OC should do, what is its mandate, etc. Then we go into the planning phase, where we have to plan how we're going to engage into the process. Who's going to be at the voter election ballot when it's convened? Who's going to check the boxes? All of those things, logistics, etc. Coming out of that, we developed our checklist. So what are the key things and what is the criteria we're going to use to actually make this assessment? And that then led us into the actual implementation process, and finally we're where we're going to be communicating the results to you today, and then we'll submit the final report of our findings. So that was just an insight. What is also important that I didn't mention on the previous slide was that it's a mixed method. We looked at qualitative and quantitative information and data to support our findings. So I think this is probably the most critical slide for me. And what you must bear in mind, when we as a team started exploring how we're going to do this, there was a lot of references here. I mean, this has been going on for over a year. So there was a lot of things we had to work through to get a good understanding of what it is that the OCMs do. Now, in your minds, I think in most of your minds, you see the mechanism of election as the factor that will determine the outcome. But actually, we could. Yeah, okay. So what we looked at was a good source was the terms of reference that the community adopted and went through the terms of reference. And what was interesting about the terms of reference was that it alluded to the fact that it is a principle and principally driven process. It is fundamentally based on the principles set out in our constitution, within the ASEZ Act itself, and we had to use that as the basis which would drive everything that OC did. We also had a challenging and daunting task to translate that Act and the Constitution into a set of principles. And what we then did is we looked at some of the engagements that you had in terms of forums, etc., what was said in the terms of reference, and we came up with a set of core principles. Oh, you can go to the next slide, I think. Yeah. Now, I think what is critical is our interpretation of the broad terms used within the ASEZ into a succinct set of principles was critical. And we used minutes, materials, etc., looking at the kind of conversations in terms of what would those principles be. Diversity, as an example, was something that was often spoken about. It's in our constitution. We spoke about it in some of these forums, and we realized that it's an important element of what we have to introduce as part of that set of principles. Why? Because the result is, if there is 100% men, colored, Afrikaans people as the final number of people, would you deem that a legitimate representation of the community? You wouldn't. Right? So we can all agree that diversity must reflect the demographic of our society and our community. So it becomes a very critical input and element that we have to consider as part of our deliberations. We also know that activism and community activism becomes a very critical thing. We want people who understand the pulse of this community, who has engaged with the community, who is engaged into the process, who has the prerequisite skills and knowledge to actually contribute in a meaningful way to how the CSN would actually function and operate. Clearly, and I think that Ursula spoke about this, organizational citizenship, that the representative umbrella structures that participate in this process must be legitimate. They must be umbrella structures. So these are some of the key principles that we consider. And things like, just going back to the diversity side, things like gender, language, race, religion, all of those things play a role in determining the final outcome. At this point, yeah.
I want to just, can you see that slide? It says the principles and values of the ASEZ-CSN must be completely aligned with the South African Constitution and the Special Economic Zone Act. The South African Constitution has a different piece of legislation, codes, regulations, white papers, as well as mandates that relate to the SEZ sector shall apply to all parties connected to the ASEZ. Now, this is a principle set of values that is in the terms of reference. Okay? And that was adopted on the 15th of November 2018. So there can be no disagreement that that Act is a mandated position in relation to the adoption and the guideline of principles. So the guiding principles. So let's just go to these principles. At every single meeting that I was at, and I've been at almost all those meetings, at every single one of those meetings, these are the principles that were put out by the community in terms of what they felt was important to ensure that the very thing that people raised a concern about in August 2018, about the fact that there must be, the process must be aligned to the principles. If it's not, it's going to skew, it's going to create problems. Okay? So these are the principles that were agreed upon, and this is how it was to be reflected. Now, I know there are one or two people who may not have been at some of these meetings, and they always say, "Nou, ek was nie by daai meeting, hulle het nie daai dinge gesê nie." So I want us to just be clear that these were the principles that were agreed to. That was the framework that was agreed to in terms of how the oversight committee would perform its work. Okay? There's no interpretation or misinterpretation. These principles and values arise from the Constitution of South Africa into the mandate on the 15th of November based on the terms of reference. I'm going to just ask now for someone from the meeting or those who are in the meetings to reaffirm these principles. Not really open for debate, to change it. Only to get those who can help us to remind everybody here that these are the principles and values that we agreed to in this process. Okay, I'm going to open up the floor just for conversation about that for a very short period. I see one or two hands there, but let us, I'll recognize you first and then I'll recognize the gentleman and dan gaan ek mense op die linkerkant aansien. Yes, sir. Could just give some guidance. This is not about opening the debate about this. It's only to confirm whether or not this was given. And if you were not in those meetings, don't say, "Nah, ek was nie daar nie, therefore it didn't happen." There's not going to be a debate. We're not going to start a church service. Only to confirm and reaffirm this. That's all. Not debating new points. It's only about the confirmation of what was already mandated in the meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Michael Marotti, Atlantis Business Chairman. As being part of the IC, through the whole process, I can affirm that since we drafted the TRO, the principles and the values, that was going to be the guiding and the measurements against as to how this community structure was going to be based on. Thank you very much.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I don't agree with your method. There's a nice Russian word, perestroika, and the whole of the Soviet Union trends over to democracy through perestroika. And I don't see perestroika as one of your guiding principles, and that is openness and transparency. Thank you very much.
Viva perestroika, viva! Okay, so I recognize the point that has been made. Anyone from this side of the hall would like to comment? Anyone? The case of going, gone? Yes?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Lydia. I would just like to confirm that I am very pleased with the process. I feel that notice was given, it has been transparent as far as I'm concerned. So for me, this is my, I'm in agreement.
Okay, so firstly, let me again confirm that based on the South African Constitution, the terms of reference document where that point was placed in and adopted by the community on the 15th of November, that's the source of authority on which these principles were finalized and agreed upon. So that is it. There is no alternative view. Those were the principles agreed upon. Because we don't want to make the oversight committees difficult and then nog 'n story wat nou gaan uitval. Any framing of any valuation is based on this and based on the Constitution and what is mandated. So I'm going to hand it back to you now. Thank you.
So, I'm going to go back one slide. So, I think what is important with this slide is that as part of our deliberations, there were 4 critical areas that we looked at. It was the principles. It was not just the election process, because a lot of things happened prior to the election process happening to ensure that it would work. So we looked at how was this process mobilized in the community. We also tried to understand how well was it communicated. What engagement did you have with the community? What channels did you use to engage the community to get the message across? And then finally, it was the elections process itself. Understanding and verifying the elections process. So it wasn't just the election process that we considered. It was the combination of all of these things that got us to a point where we could determine an outcome. So, very quickly, when we talk about mobilization, what are the kind of things that we're talking about? So there we looked at the identification of organizations to participate in the elections. We looked at a database of organizational directory where these people were listed, etc., the electoral roll, as you can call it. The identification of nominees, the development of the election process guidelines. So these were some of the critical elements that we looked at to determine whether it was fair or not. And in each of these instances, GreenCape had to submit evidence to support why they were doing it. Okay, the following one. Communication and engagement as to identifying the target audience, what forums are used to engage, the use of relevant communication channels to communicate to community stakeholders. Was there a global definition index, in other words, a glossary of terms that was made available to people so they could better understand the process? So that's the kind of things that we looked at. Yeah, go on.